If you've ever noticed that the people making real money in agriculture don't talk much online, there's a reason for that. The loudest voices are usually selling seeds, courses, or dreams. The quiet ones, they're too busy shipping pallets, negotiating extract contracts, and scaling processing facilities most people don't even know exist. And that's what this video is really about. Not backyard gardening fantasies. Not viral, get-rich-quick crops. But the plants that quietly feed entire industries, and when you understand where the real money is made, they stop looking like plants and start looking like infrastructure. Here's the uncomfortable truth most YouTube videos want to tell you. Nobody becomes wealthy just by growing plants. Wealth comes from processing, positioning, and control of supply. Growing is the easy part. Turning leaves into powders, seeds into oils, roots into extracts, and biomass into branded ingredients, that's where the margins explode. And after years of watching hype cycles rise and crash, testing suppliers, talking to processors, and tracking what actually scales, I can tell you this list is not what you've seen before. Some of these plants are famous but for the wrong reasons. Others are almost invisible, yet they quietly move millions every year. So if you're here hoping for miracle crops that turn dirt into Lamborghinis overnight, this isn't that video. But if you want to understand how ordinary-looking plants become seven-figure assets when paired with the right processing strategy, you're exactly where you should be. And stick around to the end, because the bonus picks are the ones most people never see coming, and they often the most profitable. Now let's start with a plant that almost everyone misunderstands. The first plant that belongs on this list is moringa. And before you roll your eyes, hear me out because most people get this one completely wrong. Moringa isn't profitable because it's a superfood. That's marketing noise. Moringa becomes profitable when you stop treating it like a leaf and start treating it like a processing input. Fresh leaves sell for pennies. Dried leaf powder, processed correctly, lab-tested, and standardized? That's a completely different product category. What most beginners don't realize is that the real moringa money doesn't come from selling to health food stores or Etsy customers. It comes from bulk ingredient buyers, supplement manufacturers, nutraceutical brands, and export distributors. These buyers don't care about your farm story. They care about moisture content, microbial counts, particle size, and consistency across batches. Once you can deliver that, pricing changes dramatically. Here is what years in this space teaches you. Moringa is only overhyped at the retail leaf level. At the processing level, demand is boring, stable, and scalable. That's exactly what you want. The farmers who fail with moringa usually do one of three things. They plant too small. They don't invest early in proper drying. Or they try to sell direct to consumer instead of plugging into existing supply chains. The ones who succeed think like manufacturers, not gardeners. And this is where margins quietly widen. A kilogram of low-quality powder competes on price. A kilogram of properly processed moringa leaf powder with clean drying, uniform milling, and documented testing competes on reliability. Reliability always pays more. That's a lesson that repeats itself across every plant on this list. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how many superfoods disappear after 2 years, but moringa just stays? That's not hype. That's industrial demand doing exactly what it's designed to do. And before we move on, quick note. If you want to see the exact processing standards and buyer categories I'm talking about, I've linked a few reference resources in the description. Not to sell you anything, just so you understand what the real buyers look for. Alright, let us move to a plant that doesn't get called a superfood at all but quietly outperforms most of them. The second plant on this list is black seed, also known as Nigella sativa. This is one of those crops that lives in a strange blind spot. It's ancient, widely known culturally, and almost completely misunderstood economically. People think the value is in selling the seeds. It's not. The value is in the oil, specifically cold-pressed, properly filtered black seed oil. Here's where experience matters. Black seed oil pricing varies wildly depending on extraction method, oxidation control, and storage. Cheap oil floods the market. High-quality oil? Chronic undersupply. And the buyers at the top-end cosmetic formulators, supplement brands, even pharmaceutical research suppliers pay a premium for consistency, not volume. This is where a lot of people mess up. They chase acreage instead of extraction quality. But black seed doesn't reward scale until processing is dialed in. Small, controlled production with tight quality beats massive output every time. And unlike trendy plants, black seed demand isn't driven by social media. It's driven by tradition, clinical research, and repeat purchasing. That kind of demand doesn't crash overnight. If you've ever bought into a hyped crop only to watch prices collapse 6 months later, you already understand why this matters. And I'm curious, have you ever grown or used black seed oil yourself, or have you only seen it sold as capsules? Let me know in the comments, because the gap between perception and reality with this plant is huge. Now, before this starts sounding too safe and boring, don't worry, we're about to get into plants that are far more controversial, legally complex, and potentially explosive when handled correctly. But the foundation matters. Every millionaire operation I've studied, every single one started with something stable before layering risk on top. Coming up next is a plant most people think is just a spice, but in the extract world, it behaves more like a pharmaceutical input. And once you understand why, you'll never look at it the same way again. The third plant on this list is turmeric, but not the turmeric you're picturing. Not the fresh roots sold at farmers markets, and definitely not the low-grade powder flooding grocery shelves. The real money in turmeric is locked inside curcumin extraction, and that's where most people stop understanding the plant. Here's the hard truth. Growing turmeric is easy. Profitable turmeric is not. The moment turmeric becomes interesting is when you stop thinking like a farmer and start thinking like an ingredient supplier. Curcumin content varies wildly depending on cultivar, soil, harvest timing, and post-harvest handling. Most turmeric on the market has low, inconsistent curcumin levels. Supplement companies know this, and they pay serious premiums for turmeric that extracts cleanly and tests consistently. What separates profitable turmeric operations from failed ones is vertical thinking. The growers who win either partner directly with extractors or invest early in processing capability. Selling raw rhizomes locks you into commodity pricing. Selling standardized turmeric powder or curcumin-rich extract inputs changes the game entirely. And unlike trendy wellness plants, turmeric demand is anchored by decades of clinical interest, not Instagram cycles. One mistake I've seen over and over is people assuming turmeric margins scale linearly with acreage. They don't, they scale with quality control. Smaller operations that obsess over drying temperature, grind uniformity, and contamination prevention routinely outperform large farms chasing volume. If you've ever wondered why two turmeric suppliers can quote prices that are worlds apart, this is why. Now let us move into a plant that almost nobody expects to see on a millionaire list, but absolutely should be. The fourth plant is elderberry, and yes, it's popular. But popularity isn't the problem. Misuse is. Elderberry only becomes a serious income stream when it's treated as a processing crop, not a seasonal fruit. Fresh berries spoil fast. Frozen berries compete on razor-thin margins. But elderberry concentrate, powder, and standardized extract? That's where demand stays strong year after year. Here is what people outside the industry don't see. Elderberry demand spikes every time public health anxiety rises, and it never fully drops afterward. Brands build elderberry SKUs and rarely discontinue them. That creates long-term contracts, not one-off sales. But elderberry punishes sloppy operators. Improper processing destroys anthocyanin content. Inconsistent batches get rejected. And if you don't understand the difference between food-grade and supplement-grade buyers, you'll underprice yourself or miss buyers entirely. The growers who succeed with elderberry almost always do one thing differently. They process immediately or have a locked-in processor before harvest. No guessing. No hoping the market absorbs fresh fruit. Everything is planned backward from the buyer's specs. Quick check, have you noticed how elderberry products are everywhere? Yet almost no one talks about who supplies them. That silence is usually where the money is. Now let us talk about a plant that sits right on the edge of controversy, and that is exactly why it belongs here. The fifth plant is ashwagandha. This one is tricky, and I want to be very clear. Ashwagandha is not a plant-it-and-get-rich crop. It's a specification-driven crop. The roots are what matter, not the leaves, and not all roots are equal. What drives ashwagandha pricing isn't yield, it's withanolide concentration. Most growers never test. That's why they never break out of commodity pricing. The growers who succeed treat ashwagandha like a pharmaceutical input. They test early, harvest selectively, and process with extreme care. This is also where regulatory awareness matters. Buyers care deeply about origin, contaminants, and documentation. Sloppy paperwork kills deals faster than low yields. But when done right, ashwagandha contracts are some of the most stable I've seen in the herbal space. Here's the controversial part. Ashwagandha demand isn't going anywhere, but the market is quietly consolidating. Small growers who don't professionalize will be pushed out. Those who do can lock in long-term supply agreements that most farmers never even hear about. And this brings up something important. Are you trying to sell plants, or are you trying to become a supplier? Because those are two completely different businesses. Before we move on, quick reminder. I've dropped links in the description to reference buyers, processing standards, and industry reports, not hype pages. If you want to understand how these plants actually move through the market, start there. Coming up next, we're shifting into plants most people underestimate because they look boring. But boring plants, processed correctly, are often the most profitable of all. The sixth plant on this list is garlic. And yes, I know how that sounds. Garlic doesn't feel sexy. It doesn't scream millionaire crop. But the people who actually understand garlic don't think in bulbs. They think in garlic powder, granulated garlic, and most importantly, aged garlic extract. Here is the reality most videos skip. Fresh garlic is one of the most competitive agricultural commodities on earth. Margins are thin, imports dominate pricing, and small growers get crushed. But once garlic is processed, everything changes. Processing eliminates geographic disadvantage and shifts competition from farmers to processors. Aged garlic extract, in particular, is one of those products that looks boring on the surface but lives in high-margin supplement categories. The production timeline is long. The quality control is strict. And because of that, fewer players can meet spec. That creates pricing power. What I've seen over and over is growers giving up on garlic because they only explored one layer of the value chain. The profitable operators either specialize in dehydration quality or partner with extract manufacturers. They don't try to fight the fresh market at all. And here's a quiet truth. Garlic demand is completely immune to trends. Nobody moves on from garlic. That kind of permanence is rare. The seventh plant is ginger, but again, not the version most people sell. Fresh ginger is a volume game with tight margins. Ginger powder, ginger oil, and gingerol-rich extract are a different story entirely. The mistake beginners make is assuming ginger behaves like turmeric. It doesn't. Ginger's value lies in volatile compounds that are extremely sensitive to processing conditions. Overheat it, and you destroy what buyers are paying for. Underdry it, and shelf life collapses. This is where experience matters. The best ginger operations I've seen obsess over slicing thickness, drying airflow, and milling speed. It sounds obsessive until you see the price difference between low-grade powder and spec-compliant ginger extract input. And unlike many herbal crops, ginger bridges food, beverage, supplement, and cosmetic markets. That diversification protects pricing. When one sector slows, another absorbs supply. That's a massive advantage most crops don't have. Let me ask you, have you ever noticed how ginger never disappears from shelves, no matter the trend cycle? That's structural demand at work. Now we're going to a plant that almost nobody respects enough. The eighth plant is dandelion. Yes, that dandelion. The weed. And this is exactly why it's profitable when done correctly. Dandelion root and leaf are both used, but the real money sits in roasted root, powder, and extracts targeted at liver and digestive formulations. Here's the catch. Wild harvest dandelion is inconsistent and risky. Controlled cultivation is where professional buyers look. And because most people don't take dandelion seriously, supply quality is surprisingly low. That creates opportunity. Dandelion buyers care about bitterness profiles, root density, and clean processing. Almost nobody entering the space understands that at first. Those who learn quickly carve out reliable niches with repeat buyers. I've watched more than one operation stumble into dandelion accidentally, usually after realizing their boring land produced something buyers quietly needed. That's often how the best plant businesses start. Now, before you think this list is only about safe, conservative crops, we're about to cross into much more sensitive territory plants with regulatory gray zones, perception risk, and explosive upside when handled correctly. But this is where I want to hear from you. Have you ever dismissed a plant because it felt too common or boring only to realize later it had serious demand? Drop it in the comments. The stories matter more than hype. Coming up next is a plant that exploded, collapsed, and is now quietly rebuilding in a way most people aren't paying attention to. The ninth plant on this list is hemp, and before you tune out, stay with me. Hemp deserves to be here not because of the hype that surrounded it, but because of what happened after the hype collapsed. Most people only remember the chaos, oversupply, falling prices, and farmers stuck with unsellable biomass. What they missed is that the collapse cleared out nearly everyone who didn't understand processing. Here's the reality today. Raw hemp biomass is still a race to the bottom. That part hasn't changed. But specialized hemp derivatives, things like minor cannabinoids, CBD isolates, and industrial hemp inputs are controlled by a much smaller, more disciplined group of operators. These are no longer farmers. They're processors. The people making money with hemp now don't talk about acres. They talk about extraction efficiency, compliance, and buyer specifications. And because regulatory pressure scared most casual players away, serious buyers have fewer suppliers to choose from. That's a classic post-bubble opportunity. But hemp punishes mistakes harder than almost any other crop on this list. Paperwork errors, lab failures, or inconsistent chemistry can wipe out entire batches. That's why it belongs here with a warning label. High upside, high complexity. If you've ever lived through a hype collapse, you already know. The second wave is where professionals make their money. The 10th plant is lavender, but not the Instagram version. Lavender becomes profitable when it's treated as an oil crop, not a photo backdrop. And even then, only certain cultivars actually make sense. Lavender oil pricing depends on linalool and linalool acetate levels, not smell alone. Most growers never test. That's why they struggle. Professional buyers do test, and they reject far more oil than people realize. What makes lavender interesting is that it sits at the intersection of cosmetics, fragrance, wellness, and household products. That diversified demand cushions price swings, but it only works if oil quality is consistent. The growers who succeed don't chase boutique branding at first. They sell bulk oil to formulators, then layer branding later if they want. Trying to do everything at once is how most lavender businesses fail. And here is something you don't hear often. Lavender margins improve when you stop scaling acreage and start scaling distillation precision. Better oil beats more oil every time. Now we're moving into one of the most misunderstood plants in modern agriculture. The 11th plant is ginseng. And no, this is not a beginner crop. Ginseng demands patience, capital, and discipline. But when done right, it operates on an entirely different timeline than most agriculture. Ginseng doesn't reward speed. It rewards aging, traceability, and reputation. Buyers care deeply about root age, morphology, and origin. And processed ginseng into powders, slices, or extracts commands far more than raw roots ever will. What most people don't realize is that ginseng behaves more like a long-term asset than a crop. It ties up land, but it appreciates over time. That scares off most growers. The ones who commit are often rewarded disproportionately. I've seen operations fail because they treated ginseng like a normal harvest cycle. I've seen others quietly build generational wealth because they understood that slow crops attract serious buyers with deep pockets. Now, before we move on, let me ask you something important. Would you rather chase fast money or slow money that compounds quietly while nobody's watching? Because the next section includes plants that sit right at that intersection. Coming up next are crops that most people underestimate because they look niche, strange, or too technical. But these are the kinds of plants that make processors very, very interested. The 12th plant on this list is milk thistle. This is one of those plants that never goes viral, never trends, and never disappears. And that's exactly why it's profitable. Milk thistle is valuable because of silymarin, a compound extractors and supplement manufacturers care deeply about. Here's the catch: milk thistle pricing isn't driven by seed yield. It's driven by silymarin concentration and cleanliness. Many growers treat it like a grain crop. That's a mistake. The growers who succeed treat it like a pharmaceutical input. Processing matters more than planting density. Harvest timing matters more than total volume. And most importantly, buyers want documentation. If you can provide consistent chemical profiles, milk thistle buyers tend to stick around for a long time. This is one of those crops where professionalism instantly separates you from the pack. And because most people don't approach it professionally, competition is thinner than it looks. The 13th plant is schizandra. This one flies completely under the radar in Western markets, yet it's deeply embedded in Eastern herbal supply chains. Schizandra berries are used for extracts, powders, and concentrates, and demand has been steadily increasing without hype spikes. Schizandra rewards patience and understanding of buyer culture. It's not a crop you rush to market. Buyers want consistency over flash. The farms that succeed often partner directly with processors instead of trying to build consumer brands. What makes schizandra powerful is that it's still misunderstood. That keeps competition low. And low competition plus steady demand is a rare combination. Now we're entering more sensitive territory again. The 14th plant is poppy, and this is where nuance matters. I'm not talking about illegal production or reckless operations. I'm talking about industrial, food-grade poppy seed and legal alkaloid supply chains in strictly regulated environments. Why include this? Because poppy processing margins are enormous when done legally and professionally. But regulatory risk is real, and this is not a casual crop. It belongs on this list because of its potential, not because it's easy. The successful players here are deeply compliant, heavily documented, and often invisible. That invisibility isn't an accident. High-margin industries don't advertise. And finally, the 5th plant on this list is licorice root. This is one of the most underrated processing crops in the world. Licorice is used in pharmaceuticals, supplements, tobacco processing, cosmetics, and food manufacturing. The value lies in glycyrrhizin content and clean root processing. Licorice rewards long-term cultivation and careful extraction. It's not fast, but it's durable. Licorice operations that survive their early years often become irreplaceable suppliers. And irreplaceable suppliers set prices. Now, if this list ended here, it would already be powerful. But I promised you something extra. Bonus picks, hidden for retention. These are plants that almost nobody talks about, but processors absolutely care about. C. buckthorn. The oil from this berry is insanely valuable in cosmetics and nutraceuticals. Processing complexity keeps competition low. Frankincense, boswellia, resin extraction, not trees, is where the money is. Quality resin commands extreme premiums. Maca, oversupplied at the low end, undersupplied at the high end. Proper processing separates winners from everyone else. Hops, non-beer markets. Extracts, oils, and cosmetic inputs, not breweries, are the real growth area. Now let's bring this home. If you've been paying attention, you've probably noticed a pattern. None of these plants make anyone rich by themselves. What creates wealth is processing, positioning, and patience. Plants are just raw material. The money lives 1 or 2 steps down the chain. The biggest mistake I see is people chasing novelty instead of infrastructure. Millionaire plant businesses don't look exciting from the outside. They look boring, controlled, and obsessively documented. So here's my final expert tip 1 most people learn too late. Don't ask, what plant should I grow? Ask, what ingredient do buyers already need and can I supply it better than anyone else? If you found value here, hit like, subscribe, and check out the next video where we break down why most profitable farms never sell direct to consumer and why that's a good thing. And now I want to hear from you. Which plant on this list surprised you the most, and which one do you think everyone is still sleeping on? Let me know in the comments.